Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Guide, and I'm with Talking Purple, the place where we make sense common again. So, I have been covering national issues for the last couple months, pretty much since I started, and I've tried to do a blend of both. But today, I'm going to be pretty much all local, although it is a national issue because it's talking about a congressional election. I suppose I should start on the front side and say that we have a district, which is House District 2 in Texas, which is Dan Crenshaw. And we have a state representative named Steve Toth that is trying to primary him. And what has bothered me, or why I'm donating my time for this to this, is because of the extreme amount of lies and disinformation that is coming out. Um, it's Sunday, and it's really easy to call yourself a Christian on a Sunday. But I think we all have to look at, you know, how we act and what we say, and does it really represent our values and who we are and what we do? And I I think I really wanted to talk through this with everybody because I think there's a lot of mistruths that are being told. So I want to kind of go on the record of it all so that we know. And you say, well, Beth, why are you an expert on this? I'm not an expert on CD2 per se, but what I am is an expert on flooding in Kingwood. And we really have a tale of two candidates in this race. And I'm also going to use a circumstance, and I want to show you the difference in something. And at the end of this talk, if you still, you don't know what to do, or you still are in Camp Toth, that's fine. That's what makes America great. You can pick what you want. But I think there's a lot of misinformation flying around. I think there's a lot of lies. But anybody that's going to come to me and call me a liar or say that I'm posting BS in Facebook threads, I only post what I know. And there really is very few people, especially without engineering degrees, that know about flooding as much as I do because I had to live on the front line of it. Um, One of the people came to me and said, well, surely Steve Toth knows more about flooding than you do. I don't know why that would be the assumption, but I want to start at the beginning of this. I want to talk through this, and then we'll talk about what's going on. And I'm going to try to do this as quick as possible, but it's long and it's complicated. So I just hope you'll hang with me. So I moved to Kingwood in 1986. I moved permanently to Kingwood in 1990. My mom and dad were transferred from New Jersey. I have my rep in my Seaside Heights shirt on today. Um, we moved in 1986, and I was 19 years old at the time we moved. Um, we never had a flooding issue. In 1994, um, I worked for a State Farm agent in Atascocita, and we had a week's worth of rain. It was the week of October 19th. And because we had so much rain in such a short period of time, uh, they had to open Lake Conroe, and it flooded the back part of Kingwood, and it flooded all along Hamlin Road, which are two areas that somewhat flood. Now, the back of Kingwood never flooded, and it never flooded into the part of Kingwood that is Forest Cove. But this time they were having to rescue people off the roofs of their buildings because they let out too much, too far, too fast. But it had never happened again, or it never had happened. So therefore, everybody kind of did a postmortem on it, and they decided that as long as they never let water out of Lake Conroe at the rate that they did, um, we would never have a problem. And there was a handshake agreement on it, and nobody really looked past that to fix it. The water came up into uninhabited areas of Kingwood that now have homes in them. It came all the way to Kingwood Drive from the lake. The bridge that you guys go back and forth over to Atascocita had just opened. It hadn't been open but a couple months. And there was no houses. There was no Kingwood Greens. There was no anything that was built there. Randall's, that's now the Club Fitness, had just opened, and they didn't even have their grand opening yet. And we had all their groceries were taken out, and I had pictures of my dad and my sister standing in a parking lot with water up to their knees. But from 1994 to 2017, that never happened again. And what happened in 2017 was Hurricane Harvey. And it was the same situation. The Conroe was about to breach. The people that were on duty in the middle of the night opened the gates and let the water come on down without warning this time. The rain had stopped from Harvey, and I think everybody thought we were okay, except that in the middle of the night, they released this water and flooded homes. Almost the entire south side of Kingwood Drive flooded. And we were having to launch boats, and there's some pretty interesting footage. I think we all understood what happened. I don't know that I understood it to the degree that it happened, but meaning that the water going over the Lake Houston Dam was going at the rate of Niagara Falls because they had let so much water, so much rain had fallen on one side that they had no choice. Otherwise, you risked breach of the Lake Conroe Dam, which then, in fact, would have ended up pushing the water down and flooding a whole lot more homes. Kingwood had residents die. We had one elderly facility that had people die in the middle of the night, no power. We had elderly communities where they had to pull them out and pull them over to St. Martha's. And it was tragic. We had people die after the fact of MRSA and whatever was in that water and ended up getting them that way. I personally went to drop a egg McMuffin off to some of my friends up at St. Martha's and ended up running the entire logistics program for the mucking out of the houses for all the houses that were damaged. We ended up having to write a small computer program and so we could get everybody help that needed help. Um, I don't know that I woke up that morning with anything more than, my sister said to me, her friend needed help, and I was able to get the United States Coast Guard to go out and get that person. It was only because of a person in Remax that was connected enough, saw my plea on Facebook, and went and sent somebody to rescue them in a boat. Um, there's a lot of stories like that, and it was a scary time. And after this all happened, the town was a ghost town. A lot of places were emptied out, a lot of businesses went away, and there was a lot of damage. And it took the community probably over a year before it started to return back to normal. Um, what ended up happening, so this was 2017, what ended up happening was some of the leaders within the community, Bob Rehack being one of them. At the time, he was not the Bob Rehack you kind of know now from the reduced flooding. Karin Cambio, somebody else that had flooded, Dan Huberty, who because he flooded, Dave Martin, who was our Houston City Councilman at the time, and he flooded. There was a concerted effort to figure out what would need to be done so that this never happened to Kingwood again. What it came down to was that there needed to be a coordinated effort between Lake Conroe and Lake Houston, that they needed to keep their lakes lowered. So when times would come in, when storms would be coming, they would lower the lake 2 feet to try to give Lake Houston a break, lower Lake Houston to make it have more. So just understand that these two lakes are the drinking water for the city of Houston. They are not recreational lakes, although they are used as recreational lakes, people with houses around the edges of them. Their primary focus is to be drinking water for the city of Houston, which is 6 million people. My story affects the entire city of Houston from that standpoint. That effort, our congressman at the time was not Dan Crenshaw when it happened, but he came in shortly thereafter. And he understood that what was needed was to help get the gates at Lake Houston fixed. Um, and that really at the time, and maybe Mr. Rehack would disagree with me, and it's okay if he does, because he's far more expert than I am on it. I think that's the only problem we had back in 2017. Um, we just had to get these gates at Lake Houston fixed. They were old. It's a now 75-year-old earthen dam, and it cannot discharge water fast enough. We had a big fight with Lake Conroe and the Lake Conroe Homeowners Association, which saw they ended up calling it lives over levels because Lake Conroe wanted their lake to stay high enough so they could go boating in it, and Kingwood was asking for it to be lowered so that we didn't have dead people. And that's not an exaggeration, but that's where the war and the lack of communication or the lack of coordination between the city of Houston, the people of Kingwood, and the people of Montgomery County started because they didn't value our lives. And we all got in buses and or in cars and we drove up there. And I got up and I said, we had more deaths out of Harvey than anybody in the entire Houston, city of Houston. And they laughed. And the person behind me was Mr. Rehack, and he got up and he read the names of the dead, and they still laughed. So my respect for the Lake Conroe area and my feeling that they don't want to be good neighbors. Their attitude is it doesn't flood. And there's a lot of bad feelings between Kingwood and Montgomery County, and particularly Lake Conroe. I think anybody down here will say that they understand that this rift started between the two communities over this. Because I do think human life is more important than your pontoon boat. Call me silly, but that's what I think. But the problem is that the Kingwood flooding didn't stop there. And this is where my part of the story, I had nothing to do with that. My house didn't flood, my neighborhood didn't flood, my community didn't flood. So in 2019, in the beginning of 2019, like maybe February of 2019, I was elected to the Elm Grove Homeowners Association board. And in May of that year, and I think I want to say it was May the 11th, but I'll have to get the exact dates. It was a Friday afternoon. I was out at a customer's and we had a fluke heavy rainstorm. And when I came back to my neighborhood, my employees were still at the office and they said they couldn't leave because the water was too high. Now I had come through some water, but it wasn't anything. But they said, "Oh, we had all this rain, it backed up, we couldn't get out." And I really didn't think much of it, but being the person I am, I dropped Dave Martin an email that basically said, dear Mr. Martin, we had this issue over in Elm Grove. I don't know what the cause of it is. I don't know why it happened, but I'm just letting you know it happened on behalf of the Elm Grove Homeowners Association. And I signed it that way. Now, Elm Grove has 1,500 houses in it. And I have gone on now to represent also parts of Sherwood Trails through the Trails Association. So I'm basically, my tenure on those two boards make me responsible for about 3,000 homes, maybe 2,500, 3,000. So it's a pretty good, pretty much the whole north side of North Park is my domain at this point. So from Woodland Hills Drive to West Lake Houston Parkway, all those houses are under our HOA or our Trails Association. I didn't think much of it. And then the next, I guess it was a Tuesday, it was Monday or Tuesday, I was out again. And when I came home, the water, now at the time I drove an Infiniti QX60. So you can see it's it's a little bit higher SUV with a higher grill footprint. And I came home and the water was on the main drag street that came to my house. The water was over the grill of my car. And as I turned the corner There was one of my residents was standing there and he jumped on the hood of my car and he said, "You're with the HOA, please call and make it stop. The water is coming from Montgomery County and they're flooding us." I was like, I have no idea what this is, but well, that launched me into the next 6 years, 7 years, 8 years of my life. Like wherever we were from that point to where I am right now sitting here. So I looked around. He had showed me some cell phone footage. I called the Houston Fire Department, and after convincing them that lives were in jeopardy, um, they came out, they looked around, and there was a large drainage ditch pipe that was about 4 feet wide that was pointed and drained into our neighborhood, unfettered, without any way to stop it. So again, I took to my keyboard, "Dear Mr. Martin, this is what's happened, blah, blah, so on and so forth. Sincerely, Beth Guide, Director, Elm Grove Homeowners Association." So Harris County Flood Control showed up. We went out and we walked the ditch, talked about what had happened. I had 300 houses that were damaged, houses that didn't flood in Harvey, houses that didn't never flooded really. There's probably a couple along the back of Creek Shadow that had flooded through the years just because they were up against this piece of undeveloped land. But that was that. So we went out, we walked it, we found out, we figured out what had happened, which is a developer, which I'm not going to name. I mean, I guess if you go Google me enough, you'll go find out who it was. But for right now, I'm not going to name them. Had come out. They started a new subdivision. They do what they do when they start new subdivisions, which is they elevate the land out of the flood zone and then they point it into the adjacent neighborhood. It's a pretty short and sweet way to say that. We'll get into the legalities if that's a legal maneuver or not in a second. But once we understood what happened, we were like, well, who permitted this? So myself and Dave Martin got in our car and we went up to Montgomery County. And basically, we were told to leave Montgomery County, never to show up there again, that there is no such thing as flooding in Montgomery County. And yeah, they don't intend to do anything about it because there's no flooding in Montgomery County. The then sitting judge looked at me and said, "Let the men handle it, little lady." Thankfully, I had two men there with me that proceeded to start the conversation, and then I was able to get back into it. But misogynistic dismissal of me is never usually the right way to handle anything. Still, every time I see that guy, I want to just say, "Let the men handle it." But, you know, I just let it go. He sees me on a regular basis and literally has no memory or recollection of what he said to me. I don't forget. So we started the process to figure out what had happened, what we needed to do. My homeowners had, of course, gotten an attorney. And then we went up there to start to unpack what this was so we knew what we were looking at and what our options were. And we found out this. And remember, I told you Montgomery County and Kingwood don't get along. They're two adjacent communities, and they just don't get along at this point. Basically, what they said was they don't have the manpower to enforce the flood laws in Montgomery County. There was a flood administrator, which I know her name. She came and talked to me and gave me the lowdown on all of it. She basically said to me that they're not going to enforce it. And let's talk about some of the laws that were broken. They didn't do soil samples. They cleared 350 acres at one time. They elevated the property 15 feet above my neighborhood and did so with dirt that became clay, which anybody that knows with clay, it becomes a very slick entity. When I started to look around, this particular builder had 42 other incidences of this happening in adjacent counties. So what they would do is they would go to counties that surrounded Harris County, but were within 5 miles of the city limit of Houston. They would get permitting from the ETJ of the city of Houston. And if they were questioned, they would say, well, it was the ETJ of Houston that allowed this, when that, in fact, really wasn't the case. They knew, this developer, I think, knew they were breaking laws. They had layers and layers and layers of holding companies that were put in place so that when the dirt clearing company didn't do something right, it was not adjacent to the main company, so it couldn't come back. It really was a well-organized plot. And I think that the way that they do this in the building community now is they know that it may take anywhere from 5 to 10 years before a community experiences the flooding from the building and how they built that community. Tavola's kind of going through that now. So as a result, what ended up happening is we had these two fluke rainstorms that alerted us that there was a problem and that Montgomery County was culpable in this problem. We cannot have somebody from Montgomery County that's representing Kingwood that doesn't understand, acknowledge, or talk anything about this. And make no mistake, Steve Toth doesn't want to hear about this. I will get to that in a minute, but make no mistake, I have tried to talk to him about this and he turns me on deaf ear and has been since July. So, but we'll get to that. In that same year, so I had 300 homeowners that lost everything. Some of them, their retirements, their retirement houses, their retirement, because their retirement was, their money was in their house. They had to use their funds to go in. It was an absolute nightmare. I mean, literally it was a nightmare. So my residents started to recover. We were told and assured that they came out, they made the ditch. Harris County Flood Control took over the ditch. They mowed it, helped us with some drainage, so on and so forth. And we thought, well, that'll probably hold it. And then came Tropical Storm Imelda. So as much as we want to talk about Harvey and the SJRA, had nothing to do with me. But Imelda had everything to do with me. This time, which my first flood happened in May, the second flood happened in September. So these people had already been back in their houses, put their houses back together. They had had their life recover. And then we had Imelda. And when Imelda came, it took out the original 300 plus added 200 plus to it. So we had almost 600 houses out of 1,500 that were damaged because of the negligence and the lack of law enforcement in Montgomery County and the elected officials in Montgomery County. So make no mistake, as you want to say it's the SJRA and point fingers, we're going to talk about them too, okay? But don't point fingers. Your elected officials allowed laws to be broken. Some of them are still in office. And yet you sit there and you want to come to me and tell me to my face that it was the SJRA that flooded us. In no way, shape, or form, if you walk through Elm Grove, not one person will tell you it had anything to do with the SJRA. And they'll tell you the building company, and they'll tell you every one of the corrupt politicians that are in Montgomery County that take building donations from builders and sand miners that allowed this problem to happen, because nobody gives a crap about us. All right? That's the bottom line. It's all about money, and I've got further on that. Okay. So that's basically the backstory. Now, since that time for us, I've had Dan Crenshaw. Let me tell you about what Dan Crenshaw did, okay? Dan Crenshaw, first of all, came out and mucked out houses for strangers. Not just his friend who was a business owner, that is a problem. He came out and mucked out multiple houses and basically went to vet houses that they couldn't do it themselves and was helping, and that the churches couldn't get to fast enough. So they were strangers. Of course, I'm going to go help my friend It's not an act of charity to go help your friend. It is an act of charity to go help a bunch of strangers. Oh, wait, you represent them? So he came and helped his constituents. He provided food and went through Second Baptist Church and helped with that and helped with the Red Cross and got gift cards because my neighborhood went under the poverty level at the home of this builder and the elected officials in Montgomery County. All right? Under the poverty level. I had over 75% of my children in Elm Grove Elementary were under the poverty level at the hands of Montgomery County elected officials. So let's understand how much animosity there is here. All right? The other thing Dan Crenshaw did was he found out that he had accepted some campaign donations from those builders and he returned it. Okay, you can Google that too. I thought that was pretty nice of him. And then he gave that money to the Second Baptist to come and help out, the Second Baptist Church here in Kingwood to come and help out with the homeowners, helped with that as well. Once he found out that they had acted in an inconsistent manner with his constituents. Okay, so we have had, you know, they called me at one point and they said, we just want you to know that the congressman has said whatever he can do, you let us know and we will do. And they supported Dave Martin. They supported me. They supported, most importantly, the 3,000 homeowners that I represent and and they did so honorably and correctly. And I'm of the opinion that having, you know what, I'm going to save my opinion for just a second. All right. So what I want to do is I want to give you a tale of two people that entered our life here in 2025. Okay. So in July, I got a call from Steve Toth because I'm a precinct chair in addition to everything else I do. Telling me that he was going to run. It was before he announced, and he was, I guess he announced after the 4th of July or something like that. But it was before he announced to let us know he was doing it. And he asked me if I had anything I wanted to talk to him about. And I said, yes, sir. I want to talk about flooding. I'd like to sit down and go over it with you because I know my story. And actually, my friend Chris Block's story is different than the Harvey story. We'll get to that in a minute too. But my story and my homeowners and our plight, the problems that affect Elm Grove also now affect South Woodland Hills, nothing to do with Harvey. Hunter's Ridge, nothing to do with Harvey. The property up by St. Martha's, nothing to do with Harvey. There is multiple fail points because of the diversion ditch, nothing to do with Harvey, that is flooding the North Park side of Kingwood, an area that didn't flood in Harvey because it wasn't a problem until the Montgomery County, I'd like to use a bad expletive, but I'm not going to, people got involved with their, you know what, we're not going to pay attention because you're our donors and you guys go do what you want. There is a definitive line of lack of representation from the people in Montgomery County for the downflow. And what I'm going to explain, I'm going to say, I'm talking to you about Kingwood, but the east side of Montgomery County also has some of these problems, and you're abdicating them too. You had control over this, and you didn't introduce one piece of legislation in the whole time that you've been a state representative to stop anything to do with those to have responsible sand mining all up and down your own district. So save the story that you weren't responsible for us and you didn't do anything because you didn't do anything to help your own people either. All right. So let me tell you the tale is two people. So I asked Mr. Toth to speak to me and he refused. And we went a little bit further down the line and he refused again. Now, in all fairness, I can see that as things progressed, I started to coalesce more and more with the Crenshaw campaign, and I don't deny that. But what I always have, because I understand how to run my life and I'm an ethical person, my 3,000 people in Elm Grove, I promised them that they would never flood again as long as I lived in Elm Grove. And to the best of my ability, I would fight to make sure that never happened again. Because you know what? God spared me from that. Okay. But he didn't spare those. And some of those people are still in financial ruin over this. There's still people living in Elm Grove without walls in their houses. Okay. There's still elderly that have problems in their houses because of this. So save me the I'm a great Christian speech, because being a great Christian means standing up for people then they can't stand up for themselves, and not spitting on people when they're asking you for help. And that's what you did. So I've asked for an opinion. I've asked for a meeting. So I want to show you something. I'm going to do something I don't typically do, and I'm going to have to read it for the people on the podcast. So I'm going to share my desktop, and I want to bring over this text message. All right. So you'll be able to read it, and I'm going to read it to you, and what it says. Okay. And this is what we've been dealing with. It's to a gentleman named Robert Price. And Robert Price represents a small 200 cluster of homes that was involved in the Elm Grove flood. So I had three neighborhoods that flooded in this situation. Elm Grove was the worst, but there was 100 and some odd in Mr. Price's neighborhood. There was some in Sherwood Trails, and I'm now on a Sherwood Trails board, so they're under my purview now as well. What it says is Robert Price. The San Jacinto River Authority flooded out Kingwood. To suggest it's anyone else's fault is totally untrue. I worked with Will Metcalf in 2023 to get the director of the SJRA fired, and I got no help from state or federal, local, or federal office holders. Why? Because one of his staff members was an SJRA member and didn't want to defend or deflect at what the SJRA did to Kingwood. That's an unvarnished truth. I did vote against a bill that had zero taxing authority and no money appropriated for dredging a river. Yes, I did that. Why? Simply the SJRA's sole purpose it was formed for flood mitigation and not the selling of water to the Woodlands or the city of Houston. That bill did create a new government entity that would act as the fall guy for the next Harvey 2.0. That comes along with taking responsibility off of SJRA, who was responsible for destroying Kingwood the last time. The SJRA has the authority and the money to protect Kingwood by dredging the basin right here and right now. If you'd like to talk further, direct message me. I answered that post and said, Mr. Toth, Robert Price was not flooded by the SJRA. We had a separate circumstance. I would like to speak to you about it. You keep spouting these untrue statements, and I need to know from you, what we're going to do about this and how we're going to proceed. Okay. What he did was, and this is what he has done now, is he banned us. He banned me for saying that. Anybody with a opinion that doesn't coalesce with his, he bans, which you know what? I'm letting people go on mine. I got people calling me liars and laughing, and I'm not lying. I can back up everything I say. I've got 2,000 homeowners. If you'd like, I'll start letting them weigh in on this. Okay? Don't ever call me a liar. That's the biggest mistake you'll ever make. So anyway, I had to get in my car and drive to a East Montgomery County Republican women's event to go and say, excuse me, Mr. Toth, why are you banning would-be constituents that are trying to explain a problem to you that you're refusing to listen? So here's my thing. You say what you want about Dan, okay? At the end of the day, he listened to the people that he represents. He understands that it starts with drainage and it ends with drainage, and he's listening. He's using his ears, he's learning, and he's listening. Okay. And I appreciated that because, he could have taken the same tactic as this guy and just, I'm concerned when I have somebody that wants to represent me that doesn't want to listen to me. When people show you who they are, believe them. And this guy has done nothing but show me who he has been since that very first phone call that said, "Hey, I need to sit down with you." And I need, because in my mind, if he becomes my representative, I need him to support me just as much as Crenshaw has. Okay, so that's where I'm always thinking as an Elm Grove Homeowners Association person, because I have 3,000 lives or 3,000 households that depend on me to help be the mediator in all of this to make sure that their livelihoods and their houses don't flood again. And I'm going to tell you something, and it bothers me to this day. Okay. I think sometimes we become desensitized about things. But one of the things that bothered me the most about what happened to Elm Grove is people went to work in the morning and they put their little dogs in cages and they came home and found those little dogs dead in their cages because somebody didn't have enough value for them, meaning the people, the builders, and the people, the elected officials in Montgomery County that allowed this rogue builder to come in and do all of this unchecked with we just don't have the manpower to do this. Then don't run a friggin' county if you don't have the manpower to run it. Stop allowing donors, because make no mistake, the builders are donors to these people. Stop allowing donors to tell you what's going to happen. We have had people that were lawyers for builders groups represent us. We've had people that said, well, we don't know. At least one of them was voted out of office. One of the condescending SOBs was voted out of office. I cannot have somebody from Montgomery County that does not listen, that doesn't care about my homeowners represent us. It is just not acceptable to me on any level. All right. And I have tried in earnest. So we had an appointment on what the heck do I want to call it? Halloween. I kept wanting to say Thanksgiving, on Halloween, and they canceled that as well. And I'm sure it's the little minions of Kingwood that run around and say, look, I am not a conflicted person. I represent the homeowners of Elm Grove every minute of my day, 365 days a year. When it rains, I'm watching out to make sure their houses don't flood. When we had a fluke rainstorm and it came into the road and I had school buses running the wakes trying to get it into somebody's houses, I called the head of the Humble ISD school board and had them pull the buses out of my neighborhood, because not for 1 second do I turn my back or turn my eye off Elm Grove. Those people keep putting me in office to defend them. I will do that as long as I live in Elm Grove. All right. And if they don't want me to do it, they don't have to keep voting for me. But you know what they do? They vote for me 4 times to 1 for every other person running on that board, unless I say that's the person I want on the board with me. So I am here to say, don't mistake what I do and how I do it as Elm Grove. And I'm going to say something else that I've never said publicly, but I'm going to say this now. I had somebody come to me in the middle of this whole issue and offer me a $400,000 a year position with the company that was flooding my neighborhood. And you know what I did? And I make less than $100,000 a year. But you know what I did? I flipped them a bird. I went New Jersey on them and I told them, don't you ever call me back. I don't have a price tag. It's very hard to find somebody in this earth that doesn't have a price tag. I'm one of them that doesn't have a high price tag. And I can put my money where my mouth is on that. You go find me somebody else. There's people running around this town right now that they've got their knickers in a knot because somebody didn't pay them here and who pays them here. And I'm going to support this one. And I would love to be able to do financial audit on all of this, because they have a price tag. I don't have a price tag. I promise you. Okay. So understand who people are before you cast aspersions on them. All right. So with all of that said, I am very angry, just so you all know, and I will fight Elm Grove or fight for Elm Grove. I've lived there for 20 plus years. I love my community. I have one of the best little pockets of Kingwood that you'd ever want to be and ever want to see. Okay. All right. So I want to, as I'm telling you this story, I want to talk to you about something else. Oh, one thing I will say on the SJRA, I can't find the emails, but if anybody wants it, I'll put it. What I'm going to do is when I make this post, I'll make a link to the image from the email that I got from the director of communications from the SJRA that says the SJRA has no authority to dredge Lake Houston. The SJRA has no funding mechanism, and the city of Houston owns Lake Houston and it is run by the Coastal Water Authority. So even if the SJRA wanted to dredge it, it cannot. Now, the dredging that's been done since Hurricane Harvey to now has been funded by Dan Crenshaw. Crenshaw has risen to the occasion. So as, oh, Mr. Toth said dredging doesn't work. I got news for you. We went to him, we told him, we gave him examples, we gave him pictures, we explained to him because we had a fluke rainstorm back in May of 25, and houses were projected to flood that didn't because it didn't take into account how much sediment had been removed out of Lake Houston by the dredging programs that Crenshaw himself had put in. Okay, so I want to draw a tale of two cities or a tale of two candidates for you. So I had Toth show up, and he's been completely doesn't listen, does not listen. So a couple months later after this, I got a phone call that said your senator, Brandon Creighton, is, and he's our local SD4 senator, is going to work for Texas Tech. And the gentleman's name that was picked as his replacement, his appointed replacement, is Brett Ligon, district attorney of Montgomery County. So I just got done telling you that the people in Montgomery County hate us. They want nothing to do with us. They want to support their own community, their own county. They don't understand that they represent everybody. Okay. I went to Mr. Ligon just as I did to Mr. Toth. I asked for a meeting. I said, I need to sit down with you and I need to explain this to you. I said, because I understand it can be a little confusing. Mr. Ligon took me to lunch up at Whiskey Cafe. I met him half the way. We had a great 2-hour conversation. He took notes. He understands that Elm Grove's problem, the diversion ditch, the Walnut Street Bridge, and all the other projects that Congressman Crenshaw has been helping fund have nothing to do with the SJRA, have nothing to do with that. He also understands that it's going to take federal, state, and county to get the gates replaced at Lake Houston. The SJRA is not responsible for the outcome of this, but it's going to take money and it's going to take somebody standing up for us. And those are things that Steve Toth refuses to do. He just wants this. He says he got some guy fired. Okay, let's get the record straight. Regardless of what happened in the background, Jace Houston resigned. He didn't get fired. He resigned his position. So stop saying you did something and you made legislation, because that, in fact, isn't what happened. He resigned. All right. And I think you trying to adjunct yourself to this bill by Will Metcalf, to be honest with you, I don't think you really had much to do with it. It might have been the one fluky day that you supported something that's going on in this state. Because I have a list of crap that has not been supported. We're going to read that next. Okay. Mr. Ligon has been exceptional. He understands that he represents a district that is completely torn. But he also understands that the side of the district that is torn has life and limb to lose, and retirement and houses and family pictures and Christmas decorations and dead pets in cages. That's what he understands, because that's the reality of not helping this situation and turning your back and saying it was just the SJRA. You have literally no idea what you're talking about. None. It's talking points, because you haven't even spent the time to figure out what the heck is going on down here and how many different fail points there are, because Montgomery County has taken over our drainage that was built for our areas and has put your water in it. Change the law. And by the way, I'm going to share my screen again. This one here is a picture of all the area and all the that he should be working with the sand mines that are in his freaking district that he's done nothing about because the sand mine people are donors. That's what they are. They're donors to all of this. So as a result, that's what we have. But you see all of that? Does everybody see that? That's all in Representative Toth's district. A lot of it. Okay. That's all the sediment problems and sediment areas are in his district, and he's done nothing. So it's magnanimous to say you mucked a house and you fired a guy when that has nothing to do with how to fix a problem. You're demonstrating that you do not understand problem solving. That's what you're demonstrating. Okay, so let me come back to me again. I'm not used to having to share my screen with you guys. Um, Okay. So where was I? Brett Ligon. I love Brett Ligon. He's fantastic. And he actually is an upgrade over the last guy. All right. I love Brandon. He was the nicest person, but I think he was kind of conflicted too on all of this. But he at least learned how to balance both sides of that argument. All right. But I think if you ask people, they would tell you that we didn't get a lot of support from him either. He just kind of got out of the way and let things happen, which meant that Crenshaw himself could come in and lead and take charge of some of this and do it on a federal level, even though we couldn't get it approved on a local level because of the conflict of interest between Montgomery County and Harris County. All right. Let's see. I have a 7-point list, just so you know. All righty. Okay. So my experience with Toth, let's see. Oh, my experience is there is no experience because he doesn't want to talk about it. He just wants to tell me I was flooded by the SJRA, which is not true. All right. So now I want to talk about something else, and this is a little bit serious. So again, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to have to read it for those of you on the podcast, but I'll make a link to this too in the comment section. Okay. So because Mr. Toth has been so incendiary towards everybody, he's bringing out all the community leaders that have been fighting this for years. He's bringing out all he's actually making people mad that I've never seen get mad before. Um, he called Mr. Rehack a dishonest person because he said he voted no. So Mr. Rehack went and put this whole post together for us. And I will tell Mr. Toth he should not argue with Mr. Rehack. That's really not a good thing to do. It's not a good look. All right. So he voted against a hotline to report workplace violence. 83% of Republicans voted for that. He voted against allowing people to affiliate with the political party of his choice. 94% of Republicans voted for that. And every time I say this, that means he voted with Democrats. Every time I say this, okay? He voted against handicap parking places at polling places. 92% of Republicans voted for that. So he voted with the Democrats. Voted against simplifying the disclosure of election information. 53% of Republicans voted for that. Voted against the Texas Ethics Commission educating people about work, including campaign finance disclosures. 57. I understand though why he voted against that because he himself didn't disclose his finances properly on his election forms for years. He's under investigation for that. So I can understand that. 57% voted against that or voted for that from the Republican side. Voted against sexual harassment prevention. 81% of Republicans voted for that. And you know what's interesting? As a woman and somebody that has like a little bit harassed by the ruling class in Montgomery County, I guess I can see that too because they are misogynistic up there. All right, voted against expanding water infrastructure. Yep, voted against the flooding thing, 91%. Voted against oil well cleanup, 53%. Voted against hurricane protections for the Gulf Coast. 76% of Republicans voted for that. Voted against military law enforcement, 80% on that. Voted against economic growth, 90%. Voted against highway improvements, 90%. Voted against cybersecurity, 70%. Voted against disaster response loans, 77%. Voted against training for drug overdose treatment, 89%. Voted against made in Texas labels, 83%. Voted against basic standard care of dogs and cats bred in captivity, 72%. Voted against child labor law penalties, 75%. Voted against penalties for importing invasive snake species, 63%. Voted against tax relief for families, 98%. He's him and one other guy. Voted against preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, 67. Again, that I can see that because that's what they do. That's who these people are. At least that's my opinion. That's been my experience. Very much the good old boys network, and you women belong in a kitchen barefoot and pregnant. We want that in the 2026, or we want to go back to the 1950s. Voted against uniform election dates. Voted against higher qualifications for sheriff, 77%. Voted against making it easier for people with disabilities to vote, 69%. Voted against financing water projects, 94%. Voted against improving electric liability. That was the grid after Uri. 68%. Voted against making it easier to buy solar products, 75%. Voted against making it easier for energy companies to repay repair expenses from Winter Storm Uri, 78%. Voted against property tax relief, 56%. Voted against reporting cybersecurity breaches, 98%. Voted against pay parity for Texas police officers, 98%. Voted against economic stabilization fund, 83%. Voted against disclosure of occupational licenses, 95%. Voted against improving state information technology, 70%. Voted against mental health funding, 63%. Voted against Texas University Fund, 88%. Voted against providing opioid intervention on college campuses, 80%. Voted against bonds for the Brain Institute of Texas, 56%. Voted against Texas Epidemic Public Health Institute, 71%. Voted against combating human trafficking. Isn't that awesome? Human trafficking. He voted against that too, 59%. Voted against closing massage parlors involved in human trafficking, 80%. Voted against training motel and hotel employees to recognize human trafficking, 78%. Voted against improving preparedness for wind and hailstorms, 85%. Voted against requiring insurers disclose prescription drug coverage, 73%. Voted against fertility preservation services for cancer patients, 63%. Voted against requiring health plans to cover ovarian cancer screening, 79%. Voted against allowing civilians to dispense cancer drugs, 73%. Voted against voyeurism laws to account for hidden cameras, 98%. Voted against making criminal sentence data available to the public, 77%. Voted against classifying highway obstructions by street gangs as a criminal offense, 81%. Voted against the task force to prevent organized retail theft, 93%. Voted against minimum salaries for county sheriffs, 94%. Voted against requiring perpetrators of certain felonies to provide DNA, 88%. Voted against requiring correction officers to wear body cameras, 63%. Voted against increased fines on alleged and antitrust activities, 99%. Voted against cracking down on the use of AI to generate false sexualized images of people, 98%. Voted against speeding up DNA analysis, 93%. Voted against dismissing controlled substance cases even when tests provided no controlled substance was involved, 92%. Voted against creating a centralized portal for DPS, 92%. Voted against expanding the definition of stalking to include previous family violence, 67%. Voted against handgun proficiency instructions for security individuals, 88%. Voted against limiting physician liability for medically necessary procedures when the patient gives informed consent, 87%. Voted against reimbursing counties for GPS monitoring and family violence cases, 65%. Voted against preventing financial abuse for nursing home residents, 95%. Voted against increasing punishment for criminally offenses against public servants, 84%. Voted against creating a new offense for boating with a child while drunk, 84%. Voted against ensuring the accuracy of DPS database of street gang members, 72%. Voted against increasing the penalty for assault against process servers, 91%. Voted against installing climate control systems in prison, 77%. Voted against making retaliation against a public servant a second-degree felony, 94%. Voted against creating an offense for preventing false or misleading information to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, 83%. Voted against restricting the use of chokeholds by police, 91%. Voted against prohibiting any entity of names that falsely implied the government affiliation, 83%. Voted against making ballot language consistent with election orders, 76%. Voted against surviving spouses and children of those who died in the United States Armed Forces free access to state parks, 97%. Voted against increasing homestead exemption for surviving spouses of the members of armed forces, 92%. Voted against mental health services for vets and their families, 78%. Voted against 100% tax exemption for totally disabled vets, 83%. Voted against employment training for vets, 68%. Now, remember, the percentages I'm reading is how many Republicans voted for this. So in essence, every number I give you, he voted with Democrats. He was one of one or two people that voted with Democrats to vote against these things. Voted against limited property tax exemptions for homeowners with intellectual or development disabilities, 93%. Voted against allowing tax exemptions for daycare facilities, 59%. Voted against protecting landlords that evicted legal massage owners, 74%. Voted against economic development programs that allowed the ISD tax abatement agreements, 85%. Voted against tax abatement for physicians who offered free service for the indigent, 89%. Voted against pre-kindergarten programs, 74%. Voted against sharing existing school training courses with employees of child care facilities, 60%. Voted against CPR instructions for grades 7 through 12, 93%. Voted against career investigation days for high school juniors and seniors, 98%. Voted against school crossing zone protection for high schools, 95%. Voted against allowing accredited armed forces instructors to teach K through 12 public school while they completed civilian educator prep programs, 96%. Voted against prohibiting parents who injured officials at sporting events from attending future events, 89%. Voted against digital citizenship instructions, 58%. Voted against child abuse and family violence, date violence, and sex trafficking education, 65%. Voted against workplace violence protections, 69%. Voted against requiring health plans to apply third-party payments that would reduce prescription costs, 92%. Voted against extending Medicare coverage for pregnant women, 90%. Voted against allowing physician-assisted certain other pre-approved states to practice in Texas without a new license, 87%. Voted against reporting maternal mortality data to the State Department of Health Services, 87%. Voted against requiring assisted living facilities to provide Alzheimer training to staffs, 82%. Voted against prohibiting nursing home facilities from misappropriating federal grants, 95%. Voted against improving public access to occupational therapy, 93%. Voted against including the names of people found guilty of child abuse and neglect in the central registry, 66%. Voted against prohibiting the state from retaliating against employees who report a criminal offense, 52%. Voted against expanding disposal programs for expired prescription drugs, 60%. Voted against a program to improve health outcomes for pregnant women and their children, 87%. Voted against a training for programs that investigated child abuse, 64%. Voted against providing luggage for transporting belongings of a foster care kid, 74%. Voted against the aid for human trafficking victims, 71%. Voted against waiving driver's license fees for foster or homeless children, 87%. Voted against a bill prohibiting construction of a new assisted living facility in the 100-year floodplain, 61%. Voted against a bill increasing penalties for felons and unlawful possession of firearms, 82%. Voted against the motor fuels tax exempting food bank trucks, 87%. Voted against the Texas Space Commission, 86%. Voted against record keeping requirements for use of catalytic converter sales, 63%. So we're just talking about somebody that votes no for the sake of voting no. And we cannot have that. We have real needs here. We have real issues here. And I think that's a whole problem. Okay, one of the things that Mr. Toth voted no on was flood warning systems. Now, let me give you a little bit of history on this. The flood warning systems are not the National Weather Service. What they are gauges that are basically put down in the river that says, hey, your water's rising here. You need to get out, take this route. It helps manage traffic out. It helps provide additional warnings. And anybody that's ever lived in a flood zone, every day, every hour, every 15 minutes, you get a flash flood warning maybe in your area. So after a while, you get desensitized to it, and it's a little bit disingenuous to say we have enough warnings. But what was particularly troubling, and I'm going to play the video here and you judge for yourself, Mr. Toth basically said that the people that died at the Kerrville events, the Camp Hope kids, the Wilson Three, was personal responsibility. They had the choice to leave and they didn't leave. You callous son of a bitch, is what my opinion is. How dare you say something like that after you voted against it? If you had voted for doing it and you wanted to say that, I might give you a little leeway, but you don't blame the victims of a flood and agree with that. I mean, that's just unconscionable for me. So I'm just going to play this so you can see that I'm not just, I just think this whole exchange about personal responsibility is ridiculous. All right. We're not God. We can't control a flood, and we look to our elected officials to put the flood warning systems in that are needed. Congressman Crenshaw did that for the San Jacinto and Lake Houston area. Thank God. Because if Toth was our guy, we would be being told it's our responsibility to figure out what's going on. But let's watch the video, okay? Just so we know that I'm just not making up. And you can interpret it any way you want. I'm interpreting it as you are blaming victims for their lack of action. And I don't appreciate that. We had people in my community that died. We had people in the East Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce that passed away. This was pretty local and pretty personal for a lot of people. So you really shouldn't be saying stuff like this. Again, when somebody tells you who they are, well, you can fight and not believe them, or you can just listen to them and decide if this is a person for you. But this is not a bastion of character, in my opinion. And oh, by the way, I'm exercising my First Amendment right, so I guess I should say that too. All right, hang on. Let's figure out how I got to do this. All right. Let's do this. Let me go here, and we're going to hit play because I don't have a producer.
Were warnings sent by leadership in the county and the state? And was it just a case of like when we see the hurricanes in Florida, people didn't adhere to the warnings and leave in time?
Yeah, that's what it was. This has been a truth train wreck for the Democrats. I mean, initially, Dan, they came out and said, well, the National Weather Service is understaffed because of Doge.
Right, blame Trump.
And then we found out that wasn't the truth. Then we found out that this actual area for the National Weather Service, we actually brought on 30% more personnel in anticipation of the storm.
Read that. Shared it.
Yeah, and they got all the warning they possibly could have expected to get. And sadly, people just didn't heed the warning. And there's this thing called personal responsibility that Republicans believe in. Democrats do not believe in. You can't pound good common sense, Dan, into people's heads. It's just...
Well, unfortunately, the owner of that camp...
It's so sad.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no justice for him. He died. trying to save people, but it was his late call, obviously,
Yep.
that looks like could have saved a lot of those young girls. Talk about what's going on right now, because as I said in the intro, people are now looking at the lakes because the river went down river, obviously, and went into some lakes. So you guys are now scouring those lakes. I heard you might even drain them down because you believe a bunch of the bodies, maybe the 100 and some missing, could be in these lakes.
All right, that's not relevant, but I just wanted you to see that. I also, while I have this, I want you to know that there is a multi-tier watershed project that was done by Harris County Flood Control District that did say that dredging Lake Houston would help, and it helps while we're waiting on these gates. The gate projection date now is into 2031, maybe its completion date. So we've got to get from 2026 to 2031 and be okay. And I can pray to God and hope he doesn't send more water, or I can be proactive and see what I can do to get my elected officials to do the right thing here. I had 14 points on my list, and I think I have covered all of them. I do encourage anybody that has some interest in this to read the flood projects and understand. Mr. Toth, by saying about the dredging and that he didn't support dredging and he didn't support Representative Cunningham, because dredging is ineffective. That was one of the things he said. Because there was no funding mechanism, that's objectively wrong, because the sand and the silt, the aggregated stuff that they bring out in dredging has a lot of value because they use it to make concrete. And my understanding is what they intend to do is sell this to the Ike Dike project down in Bolivar, where they're building basically a seawall in front of Bolivar to help it not flood and stop the storm surge from coming into Galveston Bay in the future, which is some of the problems that we saw during Harvey. Also, where that would help us is that, if the ocean's coming at us, the water can't drain out of us, so it backs up that way as well. So there's a lot of value to this. There's a lot of value to the dredging. The other thing is that my Taylor Gully problem, it goes through Woodstream. And the back of Woodstream, there is a sand mine there that is breached that keeps pushing the sediment up against Taylor Gully, which is what stops it from draining as well. Mr. Toth had the ability to stop some of those sand mines. Sand mining companies, they're big donors. So I don't have a list of, who gave what to whom, but my experience with every person in Montgomery County to date, except for Brett Ligon, has been anti doing anything. They vote to greenlight projects in the flood zone. We've got this whole thing now with the Signorelli people, the general, and I think Toth messed that up too. We asked for help, and then he was going to go help to show he could help and mess that all up. I know that some of you, you have an anti-incumbent sentiment and you think that that should change. And even if Mr. Toth was behind us and wanted to see and help Kingwood, being a new congressman, he would never get the level of earmarks. It's one of the things that I was told pretty early on in all of this, and I think it really is the truth. A lot of what's being said about Crenshaw, in fact, some of it, I have to get to the bottom on each and every one of them. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. We have the whole red flag laws. Dan was never for red flag laws. He just said it wasn't before he was against them and all this other. He's not a red flag law guy. He's been a Second Amendment guy. I mean, Trump's bringing him around with him. So Trump doesn't associate with people that doesn't support him. So there's that to be considered. And he's been, there's pictures of him at Mar-a-Lago, at private parties, with Trump. So, as to say he's not a Trump enough, I think Trump is okay with Dan. I understand when all you do is read bad and you listen to the radio and they're just drumbeat and drumbeat and drumbeat. You have to understand something that when you're a sitting congressman, you can't, there's certain decorum and certain things you can and can't say. There's also consulting firms that make their living after taking somebody like a Toth and identifying. I mean, at one point they put John Bonk in this race too. So I had Bonk and Toth. At this point, I think I'd rather have Bonk. At least he was willing to listen to everybody and he's personable and he greets everybody, even if he thinks we're against them. I mean, I just ran into him the other day and he came up and said, Beth asked me how I was doing. Um, there is a few people in Kingwood that are misinformed as far as I'm concerned. They are agitators. They are constant agitators. They're not team players. And their whole life is to do this, whether they do it with Humble ISD, whether they do it with SD4. They are constant agitators and they do not work towards solutions. The other thing that was said to me, besides calling me a liar and calling Bob Rehack a liar, well, you know more, I know more people than you do. Well, I really wouldn't bet on that if I were you. But it's not on how many people, it's results. I will stand on the results that I got from my community with the help of Dave Martin, with the help of Congressman Crenshaw. And I was able to do it up against a very strongly held commissioner's court that was run by Democrats. It's all about the successes you can bring about. And Crenshaw has always been a friend to Kingwood. He understood it. I think he felt bad because once he got there, we had this whole Harvey thing happen right after he showed up. And I think he understood what are the priorities for this community. And I will be honest, and when I say this, that I am scared for Kingwood to not have a pro Kingwood congressman, a congressman that shows a history of voting against children and voting against human trafficking. And I mean, these are weird things to vote against. And what I think is happening, and this is what my understanding is when I ask around as to why this is, there seems to be this whole, well, I have to be the most conservative. And one of the parts of being conservative, I'm conservative. I'm a big time conservative. Super, super. I'm a constitutionalist and I understand how my constitution functions. But I also understand there is a role and a time and a place. And when you vote to keep oppressive property tax and predatory property tax, what do I want to say? What do you call them? Assessments. It's predatory. It's capricious. And you voted to keep that in place. What do I do with that? You're not a man of the people. You want a label. Your idea is you're going to vote because you're going to tell somebody, I don't want to be the same kind of conservative you are. Because you don't have the sense God gave you. Either that or if this is your, then it makes me worry about your character. You're not studious to understand what you're voting for or against. It's just like your mantra on this flood bill that you voted against and are now having to defend. You've tried to come up with 6 different defenses of why you voted against that flood bill. You have been told by the SJRA, you've been told by the city of Houston, you've been told by Mayor Whitmire, you've been told by Commissioner, you've been told by everybody what has gone on here and what is needed. And yet you never change what you're going to say. So that either you are really not very smart or you are in the pockets of somebody. And this whole God routine needs to stop. Okay. At least that's my opinion of it. Because voting against things that make people's life better, but saying you're a Christian, you keep saying you're a Christian and a conservative, but you don't act like it. You haven't acted like it. You're not doing what's in the best interest of people. You're not looking out for the little guys. My one of my biggest reasons for doing what I went to, and not to get all preachy on everybody, but I went to church this morning and we were talking about being the light of Christ. And the one thing that I have tried to do my entire existence was when I saw unfairness or injustice or injustice, I always tried to help. I always try to step in the situation. And I was driving my car down a street and got drug into a flood discussion that, my dad, before he passed away, used to tell me on a regular basis I should have been a civil engineer. No, I shouldn't have been a civil engineer. I'm perfectly fine with being who I am. But I am constantly fighting for these people that they don't have a voice. I mean, they could all call their congressman. I think if you ask the people in Elm Grove, they would tell you that Dan's done a great job, other than a few handful of people that want to stand on principle and just, well, we don't like incumbents, or we don't. You voted against all these veterans programs. You voted against first responders. So please don't be a hypocrite. If you don't want to stand up for somebody, then don't. But don't come behind it. And if I ever run for office, I guarantee you I'm going to tell you exactly how I am. There is no pandering. I would own that vote. If I voted against it, I would explain why. You can't just vote no for the sake of no, which is what I think I'm looking at, because somebody somewhere is going to give you a medal. Okay. Earning a medal is standing up for the people that can't stand up for themselves, not just voting no. And then, Bob said something to you the other day that you vote yes and then you vote no so you can have both sides of the discussion. Depends on who you're talking to. That's dishonest. I don't know whether you realize how dishonest it is. And just because people that have access to grind with Dan are supporting you and are being vicious about it, I would ask them to stand down on my behalf. No, I would like to know what you stand for, because all you are saying is, I'm on a mission from God. I'm Jake and Elroy, the Blues Brothers, and Dan Crenshaw bad. Why don't you tell me what you would do different? Because so far, you don't want to tell me what you would do different. And what I will tell you is, I'm going to go back to Brett Ligon a second, because Brett Ligon and you are mirror images of each other, and you both had the same opportunity with this community. Our previous senator, nice guy. But would I say he was out beating a drum and leading flood issues? Absolutely not. I think we're actually going to get a better champion for flood, because he understands about victims. And although I don't think I'm a victim, I personally am not a victim of anything. Um, a lot of these people were minding their own business and they bought their houses and they lived in their houses and they raised their children. And because of bad building policy and elected officials that don't want to enforce the law, which is very much like Democrats, by the way, I might want to point that out. Their houses were ruined. Their pets lost their lives. We're lucky we didn't have a kid drowned in their bed. I mean, I had parents that had to put toddler beds on cinder blocks so their kid didn't drown. I mean, why do I have to live that way? And yet you're not talking about that. And as a light of Christ, you should be, but you don't. So you need to change it up and knock it off, or be the way you are if it's working for you. But I'm going to ask the people of Kingwood to hear what I'm saying and understand what I'm saying. We need to vote Congressman Crenshaw back into office, because the alternative is not a viable alternative for Kingwood. Whether you like Dan or you don't like Dan, if you like your house, you really have no choice, because unchecked, we'll have no money for the floodgates. We'll have no money for diversion ditches. We'll have no money for bridges. We'll have people that are making laws with no consideration for the outflow, or if there's prevention issues that come up, we'll have nobody up there fighting for earmarks to help us get the money to fund because Harris County doesn't have it. God knows we've got a commissioner's court that's not in good shape. I'm hoping that we get a better candidate in there that, that does. I mean, to my mind, there's really only one guy that can solve the problems that Harris County has that has the experience level to go against Nice Parker, but I don't want to turn this into that. But Kingwood needs to go vote for Dan Crenshaw. I don't care if you have to be happy about it, not happy about it. I don't care. At the end of the day, our property and our lives depend on this, and we do not have a viable alternative. Let me say something different. Um, actually, no, I'm not going to say it. We don't have a viable alternative in this race. We don't have somebody at this juncture that can get this community what it needs to get and help it. And you don't have to listen to me. I've lived it. Bob Rehack's lived it. Fred Flickinger's lived it. I mean, we happen to be at a point in time that our elected officials in the area have all been people that lived in the area or been affected by problems. We don't have the typical politician class until you get to the mayor. We don't have Fred owns a small business in his district, and he's been around. He's been trying to help with causes. Dave, he was part of the community. We have people in this community, Rehack, that they're just private citizens that are trying to step up and make the life better. And Charles is another one that's like that. Charles is not a politician per se. I mean, he is because he's our state rep, but he's not. One other thing I'm going to say, just I texted his chief of staff to double check on something. And one thing she came back to me with is she said that when the flood warning systems were voted in, that Toth voted against, um, there was the people that were affected by that flood visibly cheering in the upper gallery. And that tells you people understand the problems. People have to look to government at times for solutions. If I could find a place where I could live that I didn't have to be under the thumb of the government, I'd be really happy to do that. But there really isn't a place, and I think Texas is the last state that you can sort of live sort of free and do your thing. But we have to look to government at times for remedies to problems. We cannot allow adjacent counties to flood Harris County because it's in the ETJ. Senator Bentoncourt's been trying to get this interlocal agreement put together for a long time. It needs to be done. I think that the builders associations and the Houston Builders Association are blocking it. They don't want it because their solution is let me build you up 15 feet above your neighbor. If your neighbor floods that, you can't prove it. We'll be long gone by the time that happens. Elm Grove, by the grace of God, go thee, because we were spared simply because it rained 2 times in 6 months and showed the problem. And I've always said that God had Elm Grove's back because without it, we would have had a barrio on the north side of Kingwood. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. But Kingwood's one flood away from being destroyed. And I may have grown up in New Jersey, and if you ask me, Wayne is my hometown. But 40 years later, Kingwood's really my hometown. It's my home. It's where I live. It's where I have my business. It's where I buried my parents. I mean, I can't. This is where I am. And I have to do all I can to stand up for it because if I don't, nobody else will. So I need everybody that follows, hears, that knows that I'm a straight shooter to get your butt out at early voting and go vote. I really hope that you vote for Mr. Crenshaw because it's the decision that saves Kingwood. because Mr. Toth has no interest in this area at all. Oh, by the way, his video yesterday that he put out telling us that he mucked somebody's house out, that was his contribution. It's not even, it's like a silly statement. I went and helped my friend, so therefore I'm qualified. When we helped hundreds of people, and not because they were our friends, but because they were people that needed help. And I don't know else how to say that. I get in trouble a lot because people tell me I have a servant's heart, and other people in my life don't necessarily like that I have a servant's heart. But I think that we have an obligation to each other. And, at least that's what my church says. I mean, I don't know about Grace Church. Mr. Eatwap seems nice. Mr. Toth does not. So I really don't know. That's my two experiences with Grace Church. But short of that, I mean, I'm kind of making a joke. I'm kind of not. I mean, I think that these things sound hollow. And if you turn down the rhetoric, and what I will say is I feel sorry for Congressman Crenshaw. And I'll tell you why. Because he's being attacked in a way that because he's an incumbent, he can't really answer back. There's a certain expectation that he has, and to come at him this way. But the political consultants, that my understanding is this, the guys that Toth are using, Trump wants nothing to do with them. So I feel bad because it's just, let me say as much garbage as I can, which really ties to my whole podcast, if you will. Let me just say as much as I possibly can about you. And if it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And there's three sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth. So I would be careful about hitching my wagon to some of these stories that are out there. And if you need a clarification, let us know. We'll get you a clarification. It's all I can do. But I'm going to tell you that Kingwood's one flood away, and we're now one election away because a Toth here, our money's cut off. We'll never get those gates. I'm really, or if we do, it's going to be extremely difficult. Because the cost keeps going up, so the amount of subsidization needs to keep going up. So there's just a whole bunch of problems here. So if you love Kingwood like I love Kingwood, if you live in Elm Grove, I'm here to tell you, if you don't, go vote for whoever you want. But in my estimation, I've always told you the right answer. And in this particular situation, I don't care about anything else except that we're going to flood again if I have the wrong guy in the House of Representatives, because I'm not going to get the back money. And as long as Commissioner's Court is sitting in the hands of the Democrats, we do not have a prayer, because Congressman Crenshaw has been making up for what Harris County Flood Control hasn't been providing, because we're too rich, too white, too whatever. So that's all I have to say on this Sunday. Go enjoy the Super Bowl. I hope that you'll listen to me. I hope that you'll understand what I'm saying. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. What I am going to say is I'm going to post this on my personal, which I don't typically do. I will delete negative, nasty comments. If you want to do them, go leave them over on my Talking Purple one, have at it, and I'll deal with you over there. But I will not tolerate it on my personal one, so I really encourage you not to do that, because I will have to start taking it, because I'm doing that as a private citizen. The public person, you go post all you want over there, and we'll have a war, and we'll go deal with you over there. Anyway, this Beth Guide, try to make sense common again. Have a good Sunday, and I'll see you next time.